Welcome back to Environmental Ethics. I'm Tom, and in this video we are discussing Peter Singer's All Animals Are Equal. This paper starts our unit on animal rights, and we will read two papers by Singer. This is the first, and overall, Peter Singer is a well-known figure in animal rights. He's a vocal proponent of animal rights and moral vegetarianism. He, in general, is known for applying a consequentialist view to the issue of animal rights. Right? So he will use something like utilitarian calculus, and his goal is to basically put animals on the list of those individuals that are affected, that have kind of happiness points, as it were, and use that to show that ultimately being vegetarian, for example, is definitely promoting the greater good when we consider the suffering or pleasure of animals. In this paper, All Animals Are Equal, he's going to claim that there is a certain kind of equality that human beings as animals share with other non-human animals. And ultimately, that's going to be our capacity for suffering. So he's really kind of making the case, laying a kind of groundwork for this. The next paper we read really discusses more how he wants to apply this in the realm of moral vegetarianism. Right? So, as I mentioned, Singer plans to argue for kind of a broadening of our sense of equality to include non-human animals. And he kind of models this off the way in which we broaden our sense of equality, at least in the United States, when it comes to gender equality and racial equality. And he thinks we should kind of keep going in that direction and include non-human animals. Now, in doing this, you can anticipate the main hurdle that he has is to combat a certain kind of anthropocentrism, which we've been talking about. And many think that, our ethical obligations kind of stop at human beings. There's no real basis by which we should kind of extend out to non-human animals. That humans are in some way qualitatively distinct, right, from non-rational animals. In order to combat this, he wants to kind of concern himself with a couple of common arguments that he thinks don't really hold up in terms of equality, the basis of equality. So the first argument that he considers is that animals can't enjoy the same rights as human beings. One way in which we think of equality is that we have equal rights, right? As a citizen or as a human being, there are certain things that you are entitled to, right? And so, but one might argue, well, an animal can't vote. An animal can't speak, so it can't enjoy free speech. It can't enjoy freedom of religion, and so on and so forth. And so, there's no basis upon which we can coherently say that we should extend those rights, First Amendment, Fourth Amendment rights, so on and so forth, to animals. And he rejects this pretty quickly by claiming that, having different abilities or lacking abilities doesn't seem to diminish our ability to extend rights in other contexts. And he gives the example of abortion, right? We could think that abortion is a right. The right to have an abortion is a right that women should enjoy, and that extends to all individuals, right? Now, of course, men can't have abortions because they can't have babies, but we tend to kind of put this under a more general caveat of medical choice, right? The ability to make decisions about your body or something like this. And even though there is a kind of a distinction in abilities there, we tend to still think about this, or at least we can think about this, in terms of a matter of equality, right? And so it seems like the difference in abilities doesn't really kind of shake our sense of equality there. And then he concerns himself with another basis for talking about equality when we talk about what it means to say people are equal, right? Certainly we don't think that people are the same, People have different talents and abilities, and people have, come from different places, speak different languages, all kinds of different things, right? But one kind of way in which people promote equality is to say that everyone kind of has the same abilities, right? So someone might argue that women are equal to men because they can do all the same things that men can do, or vice versa, right? And while Singer is very sympathetic with this line of thought, he thinks it's not a good basis for the notion of equality. And the reason for that, it would make equality conditional on abilities, right? And this sets us up that if a person lacks certain abilities, then they shouldn't be treated equally. And he thinks that's a problem. Definitely, we don't want to have a system of equality that's based on some kind of baseline of intelligence or athletic ability or anything like this, right? So he thinks it's not a good reason for kind of grounding the concept of equality. And from this, he turns to the idea that equality functions like an ideal, right? It's not contingent on any physical feature. It's not contingent on any intellectual feature or ability. It's an ideal that we practice, right? We extend equality. We treat people equally and fairly. And it's not something that's really contingent on any kind of feature that we have, right? And so from this, he wants to kind of turn, well, it's got to be, equality has to be based on something, right? What do we really base it on? What is really the moral common denominator where we feel compelled to have a moral obligation to another being, right? And he gives this Bentham quote, and in this Bentham quote, he says, the question is not can the person reason or can they talk, but can they suffer, right? And he thinks that is really the morally salient feature of an individual or being. And animals obviously can suffer, right? And we share that with them. And that's why we have some kind of moral obligation to animals, because they share a common interest of avoiding suffering and seeking out pleasure, right? Which we share. And so he thinks this is really the basis. This is what we're really looking for, and he thinks this is a non-arbitrary way to ground our sense of equality. And one could also argue that many extensions of our sense of equality, kind of sophisticated kinds of legal equality we talk about, are based on this, right? The abilities, a person's ability to, promote their own happiness is why we would have all kinds of rights of freedom of speech and religion and so on and so forth, right? And so Singer thinks that this should be swapped out for any kind of view in which equality is based on reason or intelligence, which he views as kind of abilities, right? That would be arbitrary kind of distinctions separating ourselves from the animal kingdom, as it were. So this is the way in which he's going to start to extend out our utilitarian calculus to add animals onto that on that list of affected individuals. And from there, he's going to make a fairly straightforward argument that being vegetarian is something that inflicts very, very little suffering on us and alleviates a great deal of suffering for millions and millions of animals, right? And so more about this in later videos. Thanks for watching.